It's a little afternoon. So sorry to interrupt all of the great conversation. Hold on here. Welcome to the Springfield City Club. My name is Tiffany Edwards. I am the Springfield City Club Board President, and I'm very happy to be here today with you all. And I'm very excited to bring you this program today. We have not one, not two, but all three of our state legislators that represent the Springfield area. So we're extremely honored to have them here with us today. I'm going to read their bios, and just so you know a little bit more about them in case you don't. And I'm going to put these glasses on because this is me now. I'm turning 50 this year, and this is what comes with that. I can't read this page. All right, so to start, I'll start with introducing Senator Floyd Prozanski. So Floyd was first elected to the Oregon legislature in 1994. I was in high school. He served in the House of Representatives between 1995 and 2000, and then 2003. Floyd was appointed to represent the Oregon Senate District 4 in 2003. He was elected in 2004 to complete the current term, and then has been re-elected ever since 2006.
Right on.
Long time. Floyd graduated from Texas A&M University and later earned a law degree from South Texas College of Law. An avid cyclist and home brewer, he lives in Eugene with his wife. During the interim, Floyd works as a municipal prosecutor and serves on various legislative committees, work groups, and commissions. So, Senator Prozanski, welcome. We also have joining us today Representative John Lively. Most of you know John. He's a regular here at Springfield City Club. John Lively grew up in Wallowa, Oregon, and moved to Springfield when he was a junior in high school. He graduated from Thurston High School, and then Lane Community College, and then the University of Oregon, so very much local. He's lived in Springfield for over 60 years, and he served on Springfield City Council. He was mayor of Springfield from 1976 to 1986. Had a long professional career in economic development in Springfield, Eugene, and Lane County. He was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives in 2013. And is currently the chair of the House Higher Education Committee, the House Gambling Regulation Committee, and is a member of the House Economic Development and Small Business Committee. And then last but not least, our newest member of the Springfield delegation is Representative Charlie Conrad, who was born in Corvallis, Oregon, and is a third-generation Oregonian. Raised in a career Army family, he grew up living and traveling around the United States and Europe. Ooh. In 1990, he returned to Oregon to attend Oregon State University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Wildlife Management. He later returned to school and earned a Master of Public Administration from the University of Colorado in 2012. And his career experience includes 23 years of working in public administration and as a volunteer member of various public advisory committees, including Lane County Planning Commission. He is serving his first term representing Eastern Lane County, and he's on the Judiciary, the Behavioral Health and Healthcare, and the Emergency Management, Veterans, and General Government Committees. Charlie lives in Dexter with his wife, Andy. So welcome to our guests today, and we're going to start with Representative Lively, and we're going to have him, and I've asked them to share, and they can elaborate as they'd like to, but I've kind of asked them to just share some highlights from the past session and anything of interest to them they're working on, as well as kind of what to expect for this upcoming session. So I'll let you take it away. Well, you can ad-lib. You can tell us anything you want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. So first, let me just say, so I have all the talking points
points. And those that know me, I don't do that very well. And I appreciate why we have talking points, because that's a lot of the stuff that came out of the legislature. But you all follow the news and knows, in many cases, as much as I do about the things that came out and what are priorities. The other thing I know about that is just because they're talking points doesn't mean it's a priority for all of you. They're a priority for our caucus without those talking points. So I'm going to share some observations about the session, some of the high points from my standpoint. Remember, part of this goes back to which committees you serve on. So I don't serve on the budget committees. So it's great that we have a healthy budget and all the revenues in that, and I can provide the input you can provide, but I don't make the decisions on the budget committee. And I serve on 3 policy committees, and there's lots of policy committees. So the most impact I can have on those 3, but I testify and work before some of the other committees. So just kind of overall, first, you've heard me say this before, so this session, like so many sessions, we have a lot of new members. And when you have a lot of new members in the House of Representatives, it does change to some extent how you do business. They bring a new perspective, sometimes new ideas of what they want to do. And depending on the group of new legislators, and in this case, in the House, the Democrat new electorate work very closely together. So they become a power early on, because there's enough of them that they can hold votes. It takes 31 votes in the House. If they're just Democrat votes, it takes 31 votes. And there was enough new Democratic members, and they worked closely as colleagues to influence legislation and got some things passed that probably in years past they couldn't have. Simply, and I'm not criticizing that, but you have to understand that's how the legislature works. And as a result, certain things changed. So I do want to emphasize, and you all know that a lot of investments in housing and homelessness. The thing I'll just say about that is it takes a long time. So while people expect in many cases that because we do those things, we're going to see results quickly, we're not. No, it could be a decade before we're out of this housing crisis, whether it's part of the homelessness or otherwise, because of the lack of housing at all levels that we have in the community. But the good news is the state's playing a good partner making those investments. On the education side, we had record revenues. We didn't know that going in, but we ended up with record revenues. So we're able to fund K through 12 at, quote, the level that they expected to be funded at, and we all agreed they needed to be funded at. And also higher education, we were able to increase our investments in higher education. One of the key things about K through 12, one of the things we agreed to is to study how we calculate the ongoing costs. There's been a dispute for the last several sessions I've been there with K through 12 about those roll-up costs and what they are. So this session, between the fiscal office and that, the legislature came up with a roll-up cost of $9.9 billion for K through 12. Their number was $10.3 billion, so there was the gap. So when you start off with that gap, having the conversations, and the good news was we had the revenues to be able to make up that gap, and we ended up doing it, but that doesn't always happen. Economic development, you heard a lot about the CHIPS Act. It's an important act, but let me make a couple of comments about those conversations and what happened. One part of the CHIPS Act that's important is this whole thing about land use and how our land use system works. Because in many cases, we have a lack of large sites in the states in which to be able to site some of these businesses. There was quite an effort in these conversations to include, as part of the legislation, 12 or 1,300 more acres up in the Hillsville area, just to bring it in order to have it ready. Some of us objected to that for multiple reasons, to put that in there, because there's a lot up there already developed. There will be more developed, but the transportation systems, a lot of the infrastructure system is stretched already. And so if we concentrate those investments in that area, so that didn't end up in the bill. What ended up in the bill was special provisions for the governor, working with local communities and that to be able to make some exceptions to bring in some key sites in that. But we hope, us that we're in favor of that 12 or 1,300 acres, that would be done on a more regional basis with an understanding of how we might make these investments work. The same thing happened in housing. There was a lot of conversations about we don't have enough land in housing. I would agree with that. We don't have, but the process to get that land. So there was a bill that came clear to the very end, before something happened, that came again from the governor, wanting to, under certain circumstances, allow cities to expand the urban growth boundary to bring in land to build housing. One of the problems with that is, you know how long it takes to develop that land and get the infrastructure and things to it, so it's not an immediate solution to the problem. And secondly, the provisions around starting to open up our land use laws and those provisions, in some cases, opens up other doors. And so we negotiated at the very end. I agreed to the bill simply because it gave certain cities the opportunity, if they wanted to try the process versus the state saying you would do that. But I don't think the bill got through the Senate. No, it didn't. So three other things I want to talk a little bit about, and this has more to do with my committee work, the committees that I serve on, and again, the process, how things work. So, the other thing I would just say, of all the years I've served in the legislature, we had more bills fail on the floor, which is not, leadership doesn't like to have bills fail on the floor. When they come to the floor, normally the votes are there and they just go through. Several cases this year that was not the case, and we probably had more bills referred back to committee from the floor because once they get out there, the votes were not there also, or there was other problems with it. An example of that is a bill that came out of my gambling committee, which would have shared revenues, lottery revenues, with the tribes. So the tribes, we have 9 federally recognized tribes. They have casinos, and they have clear studies done that shows as our lottery revenues go up, their casino revenues go down. As we expand the lottery and take revenues in, we're creating a problem for our tribes. So we introduced legislation based on future growth in the lottery and how we might share those revenues with the tribe in order to help prevent this decrease in revenues. Got it out of the committee, it got to the floor of the House, and there was a problem. The speaker comes up to me and said, "John, there's a problem with your bill." Didn't have opposition in the committee, but certainly had opposition. So the BIPOC caucus, which is made up of a wide range of people, not just Native Americans, had concerns about the bill on the floor. We're supposed to vote. They had enough votes, they could have killed the bill on the floor. So rather than killing the bill on the floor, we moved it back to rules. It died anyway. But that's one of the things we'll be working on maybe in a short session, but longer term is how we deal with the lottery and the tribes and the casinos and make sure there's some fairness to this. And some of people know here that one of the things I spent a lot of time working on this session and before was the climate-friendly equitable communities bill or issue, which came out of a governor executive order. Let me go back. Goals were set by the legislature several years ago about what we're trying to achieve as far as climate change and carbon reduction. So the goals were set by the legislature. We tried in one of the sessions to pass new legislation, and we weren't able to get it passed. So the governor issued an executive order to move this forward, and DLCD was working on implementing the rules for that. Here's another example, though. One model does not necessarily fit all. So they were trying to implement a model that would work every place in this state, and especially with those communities. And as we learned from the communities, wasn't necessarily going to work the same. So before the session started, we were working with a group of cities in the county, trying to address this during the session. On their behalf, I introduced legislation to slow the process or to reset the process, which we were pretty sure couldn't pass, but we used it as leverage with the department and that. We had a hearing on it to have ongoing meetings to try to see if there was another path forward. Those meetings have continued. I believe we've made progress. We don't have the solution. Next week during legislative days in September, we're going to have a hearing in another committee on this and have the department there and some representatives of the community to hear where this is all at and if there's a solution. The problem is going to be we're going to run out of time. So there's a time limit on when the rules, in theory, were to be implemented. And if we stay on that time limit, the time is going to be made up before we reach, I say everybody involved in this, I think a satisfactory conclusion. So we'll have to see what comes out of the hearing there. A couple more things, the road user fee. So I've served on the road user fee task force for a decade. Senator Byers, former Senator Byers can tell you this, and I've been involved in transportation issues. So this was the 6th or 7th time we brought this fee forward. Oregon's already implemented it to some level, so it's not like we don't have the fee in place. We do have, but it's underutilized. But it's one way to start addressing the loss of tax money from the gas tax. Brought it forward. So the interesting thing about this, we tried in 2017, it was part of the discussion about raising the gas tax, and that it didn't go anywhere. When I brought it forward this time, when I first brought it forward, I had some assurances from people that we might get a fair discussion of it. It became clear as we were going through, we weren't going to get that as part of it, because now the discussion has been moved to 2025 to talk about increased revenues for transportation. So that just sat there. We had a hearing on it, discussion. I'm just one of those who believe it's part of the solution to ongoing how we're going to raise the money we need for our transportation system, but who knows? We'll see. One other thing, so I worked on quite a few bills for the cannabis industry. And I always find this somewhat ironic, because I grew up in a time that marijuana was not something that we should use or that. In fact, it was viewed as a gateway drug to other things. I mean, that's the era in which I grew up. When I was in the military, I actually served in a branch of the service that you couldn't get a security clearance if you ever used marijuana. And if they found out you'd used it when you had the security clearance, you would lose it. So that's my background. And here I am working with the cannabis industry for good reason. They're a small business in this state that we need to support. The state authorized the business, and we had to do something about it. So we tried in the session. I had 3 different bills to start moving it more to address some of the issues. And what happened? There was a little blow up at the Secretary of State's office with cannabis, and so everything just died. I couldn't get people to even talk about it. My legislation had nothing to do with that, but because of the blow up of what went on there, it just killed any opportunities. We got to come back in the short session because a couple of moratoriums we placed on there expire, and we got to do something about those moratoriums in order to help the industry. Another example. One last thing, county fair funding. So county fairs continue to be a big deal around the state, especially in rural Oregon. And I think most people know that their facilities, in many cases, that are old and need to be replaced. So part of the funding to support county fairs comes from a dedicated stream of money from the Oregon Lottery, and that's been in place for quite a while. So I worked with a group of people to try to just incrementally increase that percent. Very small increase, but given the volume of the lottery, would have been a substantial increase to the county fairs. Along the way, there was multiple amendments proposed to the bill, and normally the bill sponsor has to agree to those amendments. And so there was a lot of people negotiating with me to have these amendments, and they're not all bad, they were good. But what we ended up with is by the time it went to Ways and Means, there was one more critical amendment that needed to be made. And what happens in Ways and Means? They don't amend bills. They're not going to amend it. So the bill went down to Ways and Means, and it died. That's the way the system works. So I thought it was a great session from a standpoint of getting to know people. We were back in the building. We had hearings in person. All of that was good news. I enjoyed it. But it's always a potpourri from a standpoint of what might come out the other end. So again, thank you for this invitation. And I just want to say that it's been a pleasure working with my colleague here. Good guy, willing to listen. We don't always agree. Maybe rarely, I don't know. But he's been a good new member of the House. Thank you.
I will count that as an introduction, but I will go ahead and, no, that's okay. I'm just gonna say.
I can wait. Oh, sure.
No,
Okay.
come on up. We're
Thank
gonna
you.
hear from Representative Charlie Conrad, and then Floyd will bring us home. And then I just, for you all, I will moderate questions, or we'll do that after they speak to us also.
Thank you very much.
Questions.
So I'm Charlie Conrad. I'm the new one. And so as Representative Lively said, you know, it is interesting to be in the first session and to go through and to see what it really happens in the legislature. You know, all through last year, all through the campaign side of things, you always talk about, this is what I'll do. You know, you're always poking at what is existing. But once you finally get there and you get to see what's going on, then reality opens up. And it's been one of the great benefits of seeing it. It's being able to work with, like, the 2 gentlemen I'm here, with Representative Lively and Senator Brzezinski, and having those relationships and being able to talk to them and to know that really, certainly the 3 of us don't agree on policy, but to have good people that you can actually talk to and have intelligent conversations and learn from them and learn so much about the history of how the legislative concepts have developed over time because a lot of the legislation that is talked about has been talked about for multiple sessions, and it's just new iterations. As Representative Lively said, sometimes it's just a matter of the people being there, different voices, different ears listening to it, and different advocates to get things to go forward. So that's been one of the greatest lessons for me. It's being able to get into the legislature and actually build those relationships and get to know and learn my colleagues. So I am one of the 21 new House representatives, new freshmen. And so it was a huge learning curve for me from the very beginning. The district that I represent, not everybody here might know it, but it goes from Lane to Douglas line, so Crestwell Cottage Grove, goes all the way up into Lynn County, not Harrisburg, but Coburg and Junction City, up to Oak Ridge, and part of the South Hills of Eugene. So it's geographically a very large district. I have 8 cities represented within that district, from Lowell and Oak Ridge and cities of 1,000 to parts of Eugene. So a very vast constituency, and to be able to learn from gentlemen like this who have that history and local government history, it's very valuable. The things, the committees that I was on, I was fortunate that with my background, I knew a little bit. But when you get in there, 23 years of local government experience, including time working at the League of Oregon Cities, I thought I had a pretty good understanding of a lot of things. And you get in there and you go, yeah, no, I don't know. I have no idea. And so to be able to get into some of these issues and get in depth. And I was fortunate that the committees I was on for the most part, related to my professional background, but then they also had significant overlap as well. So the first one that I'll touch on was the emergency management, vets, and general government. And my background being a police officer, with the work that I did at Lane County, working in the COVID EOC, working with Lane County Parks, working with Lane Event Center and all the evacuation stuff, I have a pretty good operational understanding of what it's like to be in an emergency and to be setting up evacuation shelters and what that looks like. Again, my father was a career military. I have a little bit of understanding what it's like being a military brat, growing up and moving around. And with police work, worked with a lot of veterans. I got to hear a lot of stories. And then again, general government, with everything that I've done with Lane County, with procurement, with contracting, with PERS, with all the fun things that people like to talk about. I actually do like to talk about contracting and what we can do because I had so many frustrations on the public sector. So I love being on that committee. One of the things that I want to mention, because when we talk about this, there's so many different things that we can talk about in different ways that we can do it. But combined between the House and the Senate and between both chambers, there are 2,970 measures introduced. So that's legislative bills, that's memorials and resolutions. That is a lot. Between the two chambers, 653 passed. So that means that both the House and the Senate agreed 653 times. That's a lot of legislation to vote on. In each one of my committees, in judiciary, I had over 200 bills introduced, but the other ones were about 200 different bills. We don't hear every bill that gets introduced. Not everything gets a public hearing. So to be able to get to a public hearing is a huge step for some of these committees, and then to get to that work session. Not everything passes in the work session. 99% passes. I think in our work sessions, which is when a bill gets passed out of committee, we had, I think, two that did not make it out of there. So as we said, when things get to the floor, they're going to pass. Same thing with work committees and hearings. So emergency management side, on the vet side, there are a couple things that we did, and really the focus is, and the vets is the one thing that really is a bipartisan. There's nobody out there, no group out there that doesn't want to help support our vets. And so it's great to be able to be a part of that committee and do that. So we did a lot of work with looking at education, looking at training. One of the things that we did is broaden the public contracting to give preference to veteran owned businesses. And we did some things that really were impactful to families. We did heard about following hero road signs, and then we also established part of Highway 30 to be Oregon Gold Star family designated highway. So there's a lot of work out there to do with vets. There's still a lot more out there, and a lot of that's with funding. Some of that's going to be with college funding, Oregon Opportunity Grants, and the other grants out there that are available to vets. But really, we did a bit with that. On the emergency management side, this is where Rep. Lively and I completely agree. Coming from the Lane Event Center, knowing what it's like to be in emergency management and knowing the failures of even the Lane Event Center, and with buildings built in the 1960s, that we need to give our event centers and our fairgrounds more money, more capital, because a lot of them are older. So when Oak Ridge was evacuated a couple years ago, and I was working there as operations supervisor, so all of a sudden Oak Ridge was evacuated. We had fire camp there. We had a lot of things going on. the first thing we realized is the people that were evacuated from Oak Ridge were the folks that needed help the most. They were the folks that were in assisted living facilities. As we put them into the expo centers, we had no ADA restroom facilities. So we had people in wheelchairs that we had no way to get them to use a restroom other than ordering $1. So the money that he was talking about, a lot of that money can go to capital infrastructure to help it, so that when you do have a city that is evacuated, the folks that need basic necessities, that facility can provide those basic necessities. So I would love to see that going, and if we need to even trim it down so that it just focused on that, I would love to see that go through, because that is a great concept. I'm sad it didn't go through. Some of the other things that we did, drones were a big issue, and we'll probably continue to have drone conversations, probably be continuing to look at some of the ideas that came from, at least on the judiciary side, just to have a codified ORS section regarding drones. So we talked about drones invading from parks. We also talked about drones interfering with emergency management operations. So if a drone is in the air, a helicopter can't drop a bucket of water. The helicopter is grounded whenever there's a drone. So we did some work to criminalize that aspect as well. So drones probably be a minor conversation, but certainly a very important conversation for a lot of the work that happens, particularly in the district that I have, which contains Blue River, wildfires, and is a huge issue and a concern of mine and how I can represent my constituents upriver. Some of the other things we talked about was 988 operators. I mean, 988 tax passed. But in terms of the operators and their training, to make sure that they have policies and processes to help talk to police officers and firefighters and first responders. You know, with my experience and some of the things I went through as a police officer here in Springfield, police officers and firefighters have a different take on things when they call and they need assistance. And it's very difficult for somebody that doesn't have that training to understand what it is like based off some of the calls that we go through. And, you know, to be able to provide that help to police officers, but also the family members. The support system for first responders is so critical to their mental health and their well-being, to have that support system at home. And I'm lucky I have a magnificent wife, and she put up with my career for so long. So I'm very thankful for her. But I always, you know, if she needed to call 988, I want somebody that can actually talk to her and understand what she's saying and have an impact on her. So we passed some of that as well. We did some things that needed to be done, some more administrative type thing. We've passed some funding for the state fire marshal's office because they are now a standalone department, which is a good thing. And I think all things from that I've heard is that the state fire marshal's office now being standalone has really been a benefit, particularly with wildfire response and some of the things that's happened this year. I point that way, sorry, because that's my district. One of the other fun things that really you wouldn't expect to cause so many emails to come in, and I don't know about you guys, self-serve gas. So it was a very polarizing bill. You know, for me, since 1990, I came from California. My dad was stationed at Fort Worth when I went to high school, so I came up here. I wanted to pump my own gas, and I couldn't. So I've been waiting for this bill since 1990. And I get emails. I've gotten a lot of emails from folks that are so upset that now, and it's only 50-50. So, you know, really gas stations, you know, half full serve, half self-serve. But a lot of people were upset, a lot of longtime Oregonians. But so I don't know, that was an odd one because I'm so in favor of that one, and I'm so happy that it passed finally. So that was emergency management. That's in general government. I don't think you guys want to hear about PERS stuff very much or some of the contracting things we did, so I'll leave that section out. Judiciary, we did a lot. Chair Croft over from Bend, chair of that, I think he did a fabulous job. I learned a lot from him. He's an attorney, former DA, and it was interesting the way he did it. Not everything got a public hearing, but we heard a lot of bills that had some significant impact. Some of the bills that we heard, you know, one word change, a couple word changes in the bill can have significant issues. We heard bills about culpable mental states. You know, a bill that changes a couple words and it really drastically changes culpable mental states and how they're looked throughout Oregon. It didn't pass. We had a public hearing on it, but you can hear some significant things. And again, even coming from being a police officer, I knew a little bit about culpable mental states, but really trying to get into it and understand the ramifications of some of the bills that come before us is huge. We had the big one, House Bill 2005, which is the omnibus gun bill that came through the House first, and then was later amended after it went through the Senate. We heard some other basic administrative things, talking about court transcripts, about DAs, and getting them rolled into PERS, police and fire, so they get some benefits from that way. We had a lot of bills that we heard about Oregon Youth Authority. Oregon Youth Authority, they do a lot of work, and one of the things I'll touch on is the substance use disorder treatment programs at the back end of it, but also some of it on the work environments for their employees. We had a number of bills about confidentiality, and so employees can have peer support and still have some of those conversations being confidential. So again, a lot of workplace issues, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of just trying to support workers overall. Some of the things that I am very excited to be a part of, we had several bills about sex offender treatment and about sex offender crimes. So we tightened up a little bit about sex offender treatment. I can give you guys bill numbers. I didn't want to rattle them off if you're interested. About supervision. We also had some bills. There are some gaps in the law with sex crimes, where there were some sex crimes that really have a sexual component to it, like harassment. Judges weren't able to put people on sex offender supervision for that and send them through treatment because of just the way the statutes were written. So we corrected that so that if there is a crime and there is a sexual component to it, now judges have a little bit more authority to get people into treatment and put them under supervision. And some of the other things that we did happened because of the cases that we heard. There's a case up outside Portland, I forget the city exactly now, where a doctor was taking inappropriate pictures of patients and getting them to sign off on it. So we passed a bill, crime of sex abuse by fraudulent representation, so the doctors no longer can do this. So we attacked the sexual crimes a bit, and I was very happy that we did that. We tightened up that. On the behavioral health and healthcare, we did a number of things. Again, workforce staffing. Workforce, as I'm sure all you guys know, is a huge issue throughout all the sectors in our economy. We did that a little bit with the hospitals. Worked with them. They did a lot of work on some of the bills, and workforce with nurses and what their work environments are like. We did a lot of work with pharmacy benefit managers. Not sure how many of you are familiar with them. We've done a lot of work with them. We had one bill that passed, and we're going to continue. That's going to be an ongoing conversation for a while. It's talking about pharmacy benefit managers. And then again, we have the opioid omnibus bill that passed as well to get Narcan out there, naloxone to folks. Going forward, the things that I am focused on that overlap between judiciary and healthcare. One of the personal interests of mine, it's how do we fix or create a substance use disorder system here in Oregon. Oregon, we have some of the highest addiction rates in the country, and we have the absolutely lowest accessibility to treatment. And what I've been working on in the interim is trying to figure out how we're going to fill that gap. So I've been able to meet with a lot of folks, a lot of professionals, and to try to work on how are we going to do that, particularly for our youth. Rep. Lively talked about the homeless crisis that we have. I want to try to prevent future homelessness from some of our youth, so let's get them early on. There's a correlation between substance use disorder, homelessness, and between education and between quality of life going on later on. So the sooner that we can identify our youth that are going to have those addictions, or have them, or potentially are going to have them, let's try to head that off early on, and let's try to get them in the system before they go to Oregon Youth Authority. Let's not have Oregon Youth Authority have such a robust substance use disorder treatment. Let's do it early on. And there's a lot of work we can do in that area. So that's certainly one of the things that I'm working on. And with that comes Measure 110. I imagine Senator Provansky is going to say one or two things about Measure 110. That's going to be an ongoing discussion for quite a while. It's in the paper just about every day in some shape or another. What I would really love to see, and I think what 110 has showed, is that people aren't going to seek treatment on by themselves, that they need some sort of incentive. Some folks need it from the workplace. They need the threat of losing their job. They need the threat of being kicked out of the house. They need the threat, faced on by a judge. They need something to give them that first impetus to go seek treatment. Part of what we don't have is a place for them to really go on the back end of that. And that's one of the places that we're missing, that we need to really step up and figure out, okay, how are we going to fund addiction services on the back end? So when somebody is ready to have that, when they've had that epiphany, or when they have that incentive to go seek treatment, and we've got some place to go, so we can actually help them out and not put them on a 6 or 9 month waiting list, because that doesn't do anybody any good. And so with that, I would love to see the money that is coming in through 110 continue. but I would love to see those drugs recriminalized. Give our criminal justice system a chance to be one of those catalysts to get people into treatment, to really help them out. And I think that would go to solve some of our other issues, at least make an incremental step to improving some of the quality of living that we have throughout this area in Eugene, and certainly Portland. So that's what I've got. And again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions. If you want any bill numbers, I've got bill numbers if you're interested in any of those things. So thank you very much. And leave it to Senator Krzansky to wrap it all up and bring it home.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to also speak as to our legislative session we just completed and where we're moving forward in the future. Let me just start off a little bit about myself. As you've heard, that I have now representing the city of Springfield, which I hadn't in the past. I had an opportunity to represent the Glenwood area when I was in the House back in the 90s. At that time, it still was kind of like in limbo as to whether Eugene was going to keep jurisdiction or was it going to be potentially assigned to or take over by Springfield. And Springfield has taken it up, doing great work. Everything that we're seeing on Franklin and the improvements are just really remarkable, as well as looking at downtown. Now, the district I had represented, Senate District 4, the configuration, as Charlie says, has really changed. At that time, that district was the largest landmass west of the Cascades. It had a significant portion of both Lane and Douglas County. And so during the census that occurred in 2020, their lines had to be redrawn based on how the census came forward. And what we learned through that is that the population of the state moved to the north. And so everything in the way of districts on the south had to come to the north to gain population, because that's how our districts are set up. We have 60 House seats, and then we have 30 Senate seats. So 2 House seats make up the Senate seat. The process that we use now through this is going through committees that make these determinations, and the way it came down. The new Senate District 4 that I represent has a significant part of Eugene. We used to have 3 different senators who represented larger portions of Eugene than they do now. But at this point, the vast majority is between myself and James Manning. I have more of the south and east. There is, as Charlie says, 3 Eugene precincts that are still in what is now Cedric Hayden's district. Cedric was the House member that for half of the district I used to have, and now he's the senator. And that district, as Charlie says, really has significantly changed. All of Douglas County is no longer in any of our jurisdictions or our districts. It's all within Douglas County. So those who represent it further south than Douglas County have moved in and taken the whole portion of that. So between us, we're basically Lane County. And I know that, Charlie, you have some of Lynn County still. And so it's giving us a little bit more opportunity to be more focused. Now, the work that I am doing, I am chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. As Charlie says, the Judiciary Committees, both Senate and House, are very active committees. We refer to them as workhorse committees in the sense that we have 4 days a week that we meet. We have 4 attorneys that are assigned to the 2 judiciary committees that help prep and do work for us, and then we have another portion. At one point, when Lee Byer was in the legislature, the judiciary was a breakout, a standalone committee, just like Ways and Means and Revenue. And so they had their complete own offices. And now through this consolidation of services and stuff, we're starting to see it being folded in as a regular committee, but it still has a lot of responsibilities that we move forward. Besides serving in judiciary, and I've served on judiciary since my first days in the legislature. When I came in, I served in the House, as Tiffany said, for 6 years. We had term limits at the time, 3 2-year terms that you could serve in your lifetime in the House. And so I served those 3 with the understanding with term limits, I would have an opportunity to serve in the Senate for 1 term because of how the configuration requirement was set up. 2 things happened. The Supreme Court threw out the passage of how term limits were passed because it was more than 1 single subject. And then there was also the passage of that and the redistricting occurred. And so we had different people take different positions. And so I was able to go back to the House, and I served one additional year before Tony Corcoran, who was the senator of the district that I was now in, basically stepped out of the legislature, and I was able to get the confirmation from both the Douglas County and the Lane County commissioners. So today, my district is basically a more urban district. It has, as I said, a large portion of Eugene, all of Springfield, and then there's a portion that's semi-rural going south of the two cities going toward Cottage Grove, but does not include either any of the city limits of Cottage Grove or Crestwell, but there's a portion between I-5 and Territorial Highway that is rural, that still got into ours based on how the numbers had to be broken down. Besides serving on judiciary and as the chair, I serve on the Natural Resources and Wildlife Committee, the Human Services Committee, the Senate Conduct Committee. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the Joint Conduct Committee, where we have stuff that is involving conduct committees in their application and their administration. We meet together in a joint committee, but then if there's an issue that's raised about a member on the House side, that goes through the House Conduct Committee. And if there's that issue regarding a senator, it goes through the Senate Conduct Committee. And we basically are tasked to determine whether or not someone has violated the rules of the chambers that we respectfully represent. The other stuff I really want to kind of focus on is my tenure of being able to serve in the legislature for as long as I have and seeing the changes that I've seen. And I will tell you, they're not all good. When I first started in 1995, I had 5 individuals I considered my mentors that I looked to. 3 of them were Democrats and 2 were Republicans. The 2 Republicans were the chairs of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, Neil Bryan and an individual named Del Parks. And both of those individuals sat me down in my very first week that I was there and said, you leave your partisan stripes at the door. You come in, you work with the other 89 people, and you represent your district the best you can, and realize that, you know, we're here to work for Oregonians. That was very powerful for me to have 2 of the other people coming and telling me that, and they would stop whatever they were doing whenever I showed up on their doorstep to give me counsel as to what I needed to have information on. And that is something that I really, unfortunately, see us losing. I'm very happy to see Charlie as part of the legislature now, because in my limited time of working with Charlie, he has shown that he wants to do what I learned, and that's one of the reasons that I'm going to take it a little bit kind of off script here. I started a caucus called the Oregon Craft Brewers Caucus, and everyone's, oh, yeah, we can go out and drink. The reason I wanted to start that because I kept on seeing us divide further and further away. We weren't having what I call fellowship with our fellow colleagues. And it was basically, you're on the floor, you're off the floor, you're on the floor, you're off the floor. And there was no time to get together. So we started 10 plus years ago, the Craft Brewers Caucus, to try to get people out of the building, just to get together to learn about who you are, who your family is, so you can build those relationships that Charlie's talked about. And I've seen him operate through that. And that's how we have worked. We may not always agree on policy, but it doesn't mean we don't agree on sometimes on policy. And there is a way for all of us to be able to be a participant in this process, representing our districts, representing our constituents, and still having professionalism and social collegiality with each other. Because if you don't have that, we continue to see the separation. So I'm hoping with the new class of 21 individuals in the House that they are also taking away what Charlie said, that it's very important for us to build these relationships so you can, in fact, rely on that. Because our system is set up on committees. As Charlie said, we have almost 3,000 bills. There's no way any one person can know all 3,000 bills. And so when they're assigned out to a committee for potential work, you have to rely on your colleagues who are on those committees to give you that insight, because you just don't have the time or the ability to take in every bill that's being considered in every committee. And so this is something I think is very, very important for us to keep in mind. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 things that I feel that for our democracy, and that's democracy, and then our democratic process with a small d, is at risk. The walkout has become one of these tools that is now being used. This last time, my colleagues on the Senate side walked out for 42 days, 7 weeks, or 6 weeks, excuse me, of time where we were not able to do stuff on the floor. And I understand, I mean, being in the minority for 7 years, my first 7 years serving in the legislature, sometimes it can get frustrating. But I also know if you roll up your sleeves and you work with other people and work to unify the causes that are common for all, you can in fact move forward and be successful. I fortunately was very successful in my very first session. I believe I passed more bills than any freshman Democrat, and I believe as many as any freshman Republican, because of the way I had set up, coming out of the district attorney's office here in Lane County, working in judiciary, and working with the chairs of those two committees to bring stuff forward that I had some experience with and stuff that they could share with me that we could bring something better in a product. So I'm hoping that we can find a way that we can keep the walkouts from occurring. The other area is becoming more unfortunate to see is recalls. We're seeing one right now that's happening in the other portion of my district, which is House District 8, which is a Eugene-based area. Representative Paul Hovey is facing a recall. Right now, the ballots are out and people are making their decisions. But the reason for that recall was because a union decided that because it didn't get its way, that Paul Hovey refused to move a bill out of his committee for the floor that was going to be preempted by federal law, that they wanted to take them out. And instead of waiting until the next election, because he just won his last election at 85%, he's up for election in May, they've now spent well over $300,000 in this effort. $200,000 just to get signatures, to get ballot signatures, and the number he needed, that comes out to $40 per signature. Now, Paul Hovey is Mr. Union. Paul Hovey is a union rep, or was a union rep for the Carpenters Union, was a union member for the Carpenters Union prior to him being a rep. And the reality is this is a childish perspective where you have a group that didn't get their way, and now they're going to use a recall for something I believe that most of us would think should be reserved for someone who breaks the law, someone has malfeasance in their office. Those are the reasons why you would be wanting to recall somebody, not because you didn't get your way on a bill, but that's where we're at. And so hopefully we'll see that kind of backing off. We saw what happened in Eugene with one city councilor who was recalled a year ago. We have 3 currently down in Cottage Grove that are being faced with a potential recall. Again, these are tools that were not meant to be used in this way, but you are seeing where people who become frustrated because they don't their way, they don't agree with someone voting on a particular bill or ordinance. They are basically going to try to take them out through a recall. The other part that I wanted to talk about is some of the stuff Charlie brought forward, and that is Measure 110. And I also want to break this into a couple of perspectives. We have an issue with fentanyl in this state. It's an epidemic. We're not the only state that has this problem. Every state in this country has a fentanyl problem. Unfortunately, we have some individuals who did not support Measure 110, and I'll be the first one to say I didn't vote for 110 when it was voted on. I didn't like that they were taking tax money away that we as citizens said should go to education, drug treatment, and law enforcement out of play and have it move somewhere else. What they did is they said, at this point, what you're currently getting, you're going to get that amount, but anything above and beyond that's going to go into the 110 to be utilized for other ways and other means. Not that they're not necessary, but I thought that the way it was set up, it shouldn't go there. But it passed. And my committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, was renamed on its passage to be the Senate Judiciary and Implementation of Measure 110. And so I had the duty and obligation, and I welcome that because I totally agree with the philosophy. We have seen, and I will beg to differ with Charlie, that mandatory treatment through the criminal justice system does not work. I've been serving in this state for 30 plus years as a prosecutor. I have 5 years in with the DA's office. All the others have been in municipal work, either Eugene, Florence, or here in Springfield. And what I do know is that we need to have incentive basis to get people into treatment. And as Charlie says, one of the things that we really, really are missing is the opportunity to take someone off the street and get them into a detox center where they can actually start being processed in their own mind and getting out. There are two states that have taken different approaches that we would start looking at. One of them is out of Arizona and has been approved by the Ninth Circuit, which oversees us as a state, is that you can take someone off the street for 72 hours without violating their due process. And during that time, for someone who is addicted, they're going to be going through withdrawals. And what they have found is they say, you know, you can walk out the door right now after 72 hours and go back to the streets and do whatever you want to do, or you could stay here and we will help you through this process. There's more people coming in through that process. The other is, I believe, out of Colorado, where individuals have actually died, but they've overdosed. I'm going to say that. They've overdosed, and then they basically been brought back by Narcan. And so what they do at that point, I mean, this is at the point of where they're still in the emergency room, and they're saying, you know, you should be or could be dead right now because of this overdose if it wasn't for Narcan. What do you think about that? Wouldn't you like to get help? And of course, that's their weak point. That is where they are more set with their mind. Yeah, I want this help. And then the other part that we learn is that the support staff, support system that individuals need. And Charlie made some remarks of that as to your family, your business, your occupation. And to me, that is where we really need to be focusing. But for this to work and for Measure 110 to work, we have to have facilities that can in fact take people immediately. And that's the part that we're missing. So what we're going to be doing through the legislative days, and John kind of touched base on that a little bit, is that we're going to be having different topics that will be talked about during these days. So next week we have our September ones. We'll have some discussions around how do we get substance abuse services broader and more expansive than we have now. We'll also be coming back in after a large number of individuals will be going over to Portugal, which did a legalization of hard narcotics back in 2001. So they've had 22 years of experience to kind of get some insight of stuff that we may learn from there that we could be utilizing to get more of our resources into the places where they are needed immediately. The other part that I guess wanted to kind of end on is this part of going back to the fentanyl epidemic. There's going to be a potential ballot measure that you and I will have an opportunity to be supporting or not supporting if they get it qualified for gathering. And it sounds like in Portland they probably will have the funding to do it, and two, to get the signatures that are necessary. We need to make certain that we deal with these issues separately. Because if you find yourself thinking that Measure 110 is the source of the problem, that's incorrect. The problem is the fentanyl, and we know that again throughout the country as to what we need to be working on as to dealing with this crisis that we have. And it's going to be fentanyl today. Who knows what it might be a substance tomorrow? The meth was before that. So we need to have these infrastructures in place that Charlie said that you can in fact get people into treatment and give them the positive reinforcement they need to actually be successful in doing that. And this is one of the parts that I've taken on in my time as in Senate Judiciary, is looking at how our system is set up and how we can get better results than what we've been getting. Our recidivism rate really is something that we may use as a judgment. That's based on how do people commit new crimes within a 3-year period. And what we've seen in Oregon, our recidivism rate is somewhere between 35 and 43%. We had an opportunity back in 2017 to look at the Norway system, where their whole country, their recidivism rate was down to 20%. And that's because, from my perspective, how they have taken away the positives of using incentive-based change as compared to punitive style of change. So those are the things that I feel that we can continue to work on, and I will continue to work on those. I do believe that we need to maintain the continuity of our system for our democratic process, because if we don't get us back together working hand in hand, side by side, we'll continue to see our state take the same path that many other states have done, to the point of polarization will be the game. And we will not be able to actually build those relationships to the point of where you can work together and actually bring positive change for the citizens of the state. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, all of you. Okay, I'm gonna give us time for just a couple questions, so if anybody's got one, go for it.
Thank you very much. My name is Tracy Sutton, from Springfield City Club. Thank you for the summary. Just to put in and thank you for recognizing the infrastructure work in Glenwood. The topic that is on our mind today is water supply and water quality. And so I know there are a lot of federal monies that have been coming down, but as you know, Springfield is neither rural nor metropolitan. So we're really kind of out of eligibility for a lot of those monies. And so we're being told, ask. And so my ask today is, how best do we ask for those monies? And how do we tell our story in a way that will compete, for lack of a better word, with these big things like drugs and, and education? So, water quality, how do we tell the story in a way that shows that there is a need for those fundings? We do have a $60 million water treatment facility that we're building out in Thurston. And so, that $60 million, we're trying to defray those costs from showing up in rates. So the residents aren't paying for that. So.
I'll take part of that, but I'll defer to you, St. Louis, so if you want the version of like.
So let me just say, the process we use in this state, it funds all kinds of projects that aren't necessarily something that the state, you normally think the state would do. And it ends up being a huge bill at the end of the thing, and part of it's based on how much money is available for revenues and that going up. So I encouraged sub this year. So we had a request from eWeb to help fund their new water treatment. Whether I liked that or not, the point was they were requesting it, and it could potentially have been approved through that budget process and to do it. I encouraged sub to submit the same thing. There's not a simple answer here, because much of that doesn't fall within any department within the state that there's funds available. We talk about federal grants and at the state. But there is a project on top of that ends up at the end of the legislature being funded. eWeb didn't get funded, and I wasn't in favor of this point. But the point of it is there is that process, and especially with increasing revenues, I just encourage sub and other people to understand how do they get in that process. The $2 million we got for Mill Street in Springfield came out of that process. It's not something normally funded, but the point of it is you have to advocate to get into that, wanting to do that. So that's the only answer I have at this point.
So I'll just, similar to what Rip Lively said, and Senator Brzezinski mentioned caucuses. We have a bunch of caucuses, which basically members getting together for various purposes. We've got a lot of caucus in the House. So, and it's a bipartisan caucus. It's Rep Owens and Rep Helm lead it, and we get together and talk about water. So I've got a rural district. Water is a significant issue for my rural district. McKenzie River, with Blue River, and issues they're having. One of my other district issues that I've been tackling and trying to work as much as I can is wastewater is a significant issue. So the process that Rep Lively mentioned, I was able to get $360,000 for the city of Lowell to fix their wastewater system. So going through and looking at some of that and getting your paperwork, getting their estimates, getting all that stuff, the project ready to go. So that if you were to go to him and say, hey, would you advocate for this? Is this something you can advocate for? He's got all that support documentation that you need. The other side, again, for me, for my district that I always look at, it's emergency management. That's one of the issues that I went with Lowell, is the way that they're situated on the 58 corridor and what they need to do, and the fact that they've got Dexter Reservoir. And if their wastewater failed, then all of a sudden there is the water quality of Dexter Reservoir. They also have the tourism side. They also host Pac-12 championships up there. So as many other things as you could tie into that, so that if it does go into the Ways and Means process, somebody can look at it and go, wow, here are 6 different ways that means that this process and this project is so important for this region, for the city, and going forward as well. So that would be my recommendation. It's really that solid justification for that time as much as you can do it.
Well, the last thing I would just say on that is that besides the one that we have access to, and with revenues that came in, that gave us nothing to do more funding than we are. These type of programs are one-time shots usually, as compared to ongoing. But I would also encourage staff to be working directly with the federal delegation, because they can actually have money come directly from their process to a community. There are some some monies that will come through the federal system that will be called pass-throughs, and then the state will have its hand on it in the sense of helping implement some of the money as to where it goes. But don't forget the best, because it is a very, very significant opportunity. Of course, everyone knows Peter Fazio, as long as we have him here, how he's been able to do it. Mount Moyle's there. We have 2 senators, White and Markley. Don't forget them.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Lee Byer has a question. Go for it, Lee.
I think all of you mentioned the need for looking at some more land for housing or some of that. When I served a lot of the small districts around the area and some in the metro area too, we were always constrained by the federal definition of wetlands. Some places it didn't make any sense, and others certainly nobody would argue maintaining significant wetlands, protecting those. Now that the federal government or Supreme Court has said that not all lands fall within the jurisdiction of the US government and it is up to the states, do you think, or would you consider proposing legislation that would redefine how the state looks at wetlands to put more logic into that process?
Yes.
I like logic, so yes.
Yeah.
And Lee, that this is one of the scenarios that just because the business said what they said, what do they really mean by what they said? So that's something that's gonna have to be fleshed out. This is something that has to be worked on, and really, from my perspective, the way that we get good legislation is having work groups, people that come together, bring from different disciplines to actually work the issue. This is one of those areas that we definitely would need to have that type of ongoing dialogue before I think we brought anything forward, because we don't want to miss the mark if we're going to try to do something that we could find ourselves really advocating against our own interests based on how the Fed may really interpret what they've said.
Okay. Well, it's kind of that time, so I'm gonna call it. But I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank our online audience. Thank you all so much. And just to give you a quick teaser for our next program, Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, BEST, is coming to talk about better streets for people and business on October 5th. So please come and join me. I'll be here. But with that, I will send you all off. So thank you so much.